When we think of Loch Ness monster hunters, certain names immediately come to mind. Tim Dinsdale, with his famous 1960 film, Robert Rhines and his underwater expeditions, Adrian Shine and his systematic investigations. But there's one name that history has largely forgotten, a man whose sighting was perhaps the most extraordinary land encounter ever reported, yet whose story was overshadowed by the very legends he helped create. This is the story of Torquil MacLeod, a dedicated researcher whose meticulous observations and scientific approach deserved far more recognition than they received. A man whose 1960 encounter at Horseshoe Scree should have made him famous, but instead became a footnote in someone else's story. By 1960, Loch Ness monster research was entering a new era. The sensational newspaper reports of the 1930s were giving way to more serious investigation. Constance White had published her groundbreaking book, More Than a Legend, in 1957, legitimizing the search and inspiring a new generation of researchers. Among these was Torquil MacLeod, not a visiting scientist or amateur enthusiast, but a local man who knew the Loch intimately. While others came and went, MacLeod lived and breathed Loch Ness. He understood its moods, its patterns, its secrets. During his search for the monster, Torquil was sponsored by a mysterious figure, Sir Charles Dixon, and lived off-grid in an old ex-military truck. Horseshoe Scree sits on the eastern shore of the Loch, a distinctive curved beach of stones and shingle that extends into the dark waters. It was here, in February 1960, that MacLeod would make his extraordinary observation, one that would define his life's work, yet somehow fade into the background of Nessie lore. February 1960 was bitterly cold in the Scottish Highlands. Most sensible people stayed indoors, but Torquil MacLeod was not most people. Armed with powerful binoculars and his ever-present notebook, he had positioned himself across from Horseshoe Scree for another vigil. What happened next would become one of the most detailed and extraordinary sighting reports in Loch Ness history. At approximately 1 mile distance, MacLeod observed through his binoculars what appeared to be a massive creature, partially beached on the Scree with its rear portion still trailing in the water. For 9 full minutes, he watched as the beast moved about using what he described as front paddles or flippers. But this wasn't just another fleeting glimpse. MacLeod was a meticulous observer. He noted the creature's coloration, grey and black. He estimated its visible length at 40 to 60 feet, not including what remained submerged. He described a trunk-like appendage, similar to an elephant's. Most remarkably, he watched as the long neck turned from side to side, the head clearly visible above water. 9 minutes. In the world of cryptozoology, that's an eternity. Most sightings last seconds. MacLeod had nearly 10 minutes to observe, to study, to document. This was, by many measures, the most exceptional land sighting ever reported, the largest creature ever documented ashore. In the days following his sighting, MacLeod did what any serious researcher would do. He documented everything in meticulous detail. But more importantly, he reached out to the one person he knew would understand the significance of what he had witnessed: Constance White. White, author of More Than a Legend, had become the unofficial coordinator of serious Loch Ness research. Her book had established her as someone who took witness accounts seriously, who approached the mystery with both skepticism and open-mindedness.
Dear Mrs. White, I have had my first hint of success today. I have seen the LNM at a range of 1 mile through 8 glasses in broad daylight, raining. It was half ashore, and I had a clear view of it for 9 minutes, during which time its neck moved from side to side, the animal eventually turning itself suddenly to the left, in a sort of U-shape, and flopping into deep water, which I deduced from the fact that it did not reappear or leave any wake, only ripples where it went in. I am as excited as a schoolboy about it all, and this sighting has abolished the last faint doubts I had that it may have been some cognate form of animal. As it turned, I had a clear view of its left foreflipper, which is grey in colour, spade-shaped, and devoid of any markings which might indicate toes or claws, i.e., it is therefore a flipper, and not a foot. Most unfortunately, the head is too small to show any details at such a distance, and in any case, except for about 1 second as it turned, it was facing more or less directly away from me all the time. I confess to being rather appalled at its size. Somehow the descriptions have not quite sunk in. Or perhaps I have become too familiar with them. But there is no doubt that the individual animal I saw this afternoon was of the order of 40-60 feet in length, and I did not at any time, alas, see its tail, as the body was at no time completely clear of the water. It looked, as other witnesses have said, like elephant skin, but I got the impression that the back was more rounded than humped. Looking at it, end on from behind, with the animal resting at an angle on the shore, i.e., with its forepart higher than its hindquarters. This may, of course, have been due to its posture, or even an effect of light and shadows, such as there was. I had a colour tin camera with me, but no telephoto lens, so I reserved what film I had loaded in case it approached. I gave it half an hour after its disappearance, but saw no evidence of it or its wash, and so came home.
MacLeod's letter to White was remarkable for its precision and lack of sensationalism. Unlike many who claimed sightings, MacLeod didn't embellish or dramatize. He simply reported what he had seen, complete with measurements, timings, weather conditions, and his own assessment of the observation's reliability. In the letter, MacLeod expressed both excitement and frustration. Excitement at having witnessed something extraordinary, frustration at his lack of photographic equipment capable of capturing the scene at such distance. He mentioned that while he had his movie camera, it lacked the telephoto capability needed to document the sighting properly. This practical limitation would prove prophetic. In an era increasingly dominated by photographic evidence, MacLeod's purely observational account, no matter how detailed, would struggle to compete with even blurry images. Just months after MacLeod's sighting, another researcher arrived at Loch Ness. Tim Dinsdale was an aeronautical engineer from London, inspired by Constance White's book to make his own investigation. In April 1960, Dinsdale captured several minutes of film showing what appeared to be a large object moving across the loch. The Dinsdale film changed everything. While MacLeod's 9-minute observation was far more detailed and extraordinary than Dinsdale's distant filming, the camera proved mightier than the eyewitness. The film could be analysed, enhanced, studied by experts. It provided proof in a way that even the most credible eyewitness account could not. Suddenly, Tim Dinsdale was the name associated with serious Loch Ness research. His book, Loch Ness Monster, became a bestseller. He appeared on television, gave lectures, became the public face of monster hunting. The aeronautical engineer from London had eclipsed the local man who had actually seen far more. It wasn't fair, but it was perhaps inevitable. In an age of mass media, the photographic evidence, no matter how ambiguous, would always trump the eyewitness account, no matter how detailed or credible. MacLeod's meticulous 9-minute observation became a side note to Dinsdale's few minutes of distant filming. The local expert was overshadowed by the visiting amateur. The most extraordinary land sighting on record became a footnote in someone else's story. As decades passed, Loch Ness research evolved. The romantic era of monster hunting gave way to more skeptical analysis. New investigators brought scientific rigor to old accounts, and not all of them survived scrutiny. Among these new critics was Dick Rayner, a former member of the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, who had become increasingly skeptical of many classic sightings. Rayner brought a forensic approach to analysing historical accounts, and few escaped his critical eye. When Rayner turned his attention to MacLeod's 1960 sighting, he raised troubling questions. The distance involved, the lighting conditions, the possibility of misidentification, all came under scrutiny. Rayner's critique highlighted the fundamental weakness of purely observational accounts. Without physical evidence, even the most detailed sighting remained just one person's interpretation of what they saw. But here's the tragedy of Torquil MacLeod's story. By the time serious criticism emerged, there was no one left to defend his account with the passion and detail it deserved. Unlike Dinsdale, who had built a career and reputation around his footage, MacLeod had remained in the shadows. When the critics came, he had no platform, no following, no voice in the broader conversation. The man who had made perhaps the most extraordinary observation in Loch Ness history found his account dissected by people who had never spent 9 minutes watching anything at the loch, let alone something as remarkable as what he claimed to have seen. Today, if you visit Horseshoe Scree, there's no plaque marking the site of Torquil MacLeod's extraordinary sighting. No tour guide mentions his name. His 9-minute observation, the longest and most detailed land sighting on record, has been relegated to a few lines in specialist books. Meanwhile, the spot where Tim Dinsdale filmed his famous footage is well marked and frequently visited. The difference isn't in the quality of the evidence, it's in the power of image over narrative, celebrity over credibility, London engineer over Highland local. This isn't to diminish Dinsdale's contribution. His film remains important evidence, but it highlights how history can be unfair to those who lack the means or inclination for self-promotion. MacLeod was a researcher, not a showman, a local observer, not a visiting expert, a man more interested in understanding than in being understood. The records show he was supposed to have observed a plesiosaur-type animal 40 to 60 feet long without the tail, for 9 minutes, through binoculars at a mile away. These details matter. They represent the most significant land sighting in Loch Ness history. The story of Torquil MacLeod reminds us that history is written by those with the loudest voices, not necessarily the most important stories. In our rush to celebrate the famous, we sometimes forget the foundations they built upon. Every time someone mentions the Loch Ness Monster, they're invoking a mystery that people like Torquil MacLeod dedicated their lives to understanding. His 9 minutes at Horseshoe Scree may not have made him famous, but they contributed to one of the world's most enduring enigmas. The Loch remembers, even if we've forgotten. If you are enjoying the content and want more, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video. If there are any other sightings you would like us to cover, then please comment underneath. There are links to the Dick Rayner study of Torquil MacLeod's sighting and Tim Dinsdale's film underneath this video. Thanks for watching.